Good afternoon, everybody. Hello and welcome. I'm delighted to have you all here for this talk. You're in more numbers than I expected. Wouldn't it be great if you can create applications that work both on the cloud and on the client, synchronize data across devices, leverages users' social graph? We're going to talk about all of that, and I'm going to show you how easy it is to actually build these applications and using any programming language that you want, any technology. This is sort of a unique session. Not often at PDC do you see a Microsoft employee talking about competing programming languages. But you'll find out in this case they're not really our competitors. My name is Nishant Gupta. I'm a program manager with Live Services team. And I work on defining the way data is accessed via live services and the format in which you can access it. We're going to quickly go over 3 key questions. Why live services, what you can do with it, and how you do it. And I'm going to spend majority of the time writing code in different languages to see how easy to actually do it. We're going to take last 15 minutes for some questions and answers. Why? It really is a twofold question. Why live services and why non-Microsoft technologies? Live services is about synchronizing life, synchronizing digital life to be more precise. How many of you over here use email or have a digital camera? Well, my point is that most of us are leading a digital life. And those who are not will soon be leading one. So if you're writing applications that has anything to do with digital life, you should be talking to live services. Let's take a look at what the current state of digital life is. The first and foremost thing that is in digital life is the content. The photos that you take, the blog entries, your music, your videos, your Facebook profile, your MySpace. All these are part of the digital content that makes up your digital life. And then you have the devices on which this data resides. You have your PC, you have desktop, you have Macs, you have Blackberries, Windows mobile phone, and most definitely the cloud. But as of now, as of today, a lot of these devices are isolated silos of digital content. Information doesn't go between devices very well. It's not synchronized. Thirdly, you have the applications that you use to render this information. The more number of devices you have, the more installs you do, and you have different experiences on different devices. And finally, you have the relationships, friends and family and other folks with whom you share this data. What live services provides you, that it brings together all these 4 things together in a coherent manner and provide you a model to interact with them. And now to the second part of the why. Why non-Microsoft technologies? When we talk about modeling digital content, it would be naive on my part to assume that everything is on .NET, everything is on Windows. There are others. So we wanted to design live services in a way, in a non-partisan manner, so that we can sort of reach across the aisle and to be able to talk to every developer that is out there and provide equal opportunity for both the .NET developer crowd and others to build applications on live services. Now to the part what live services can do for you or what you can do with it. Well, live services is sort of a unique, as from a technology standpoint from Microsoft, unlike SQL or .NET, that it comes with data. There are over 400 million Windows Live ID users. And if you're writing applications with live services, you have instant access to all those users. And you have potential access to all the data that they have with us. So there's a huge space and a huge potential for you to target your applications. But in addition to that, it also solves some boilerplate problems that developers face today, such as to be able to synchronize data across devices, to be able to provide access control to data that you are sharing, to be able to access their profile information, access their social graph, and so on. And live services provide you all of that. Most of it is built in. You don't have to do anything to do it. And a lot of the things other than this are easy to build on. And now to the most important question. How? How do we do this? And the answer is Live Framework. It's a uniform way of programming live services from any platform, any language, any application, and any device. And it uses HTTP, which is the omnipresent protocol in the internet. We use HTTP-based REST APIs to expose information on Live Framework. When we were designing these things, we had 3 key design principles that we kept in mind, and we try to adhere to them and follow them. First is open. It is based upon open standards, standards that are widely adopted by the technical community, by folks in this room, by everybody else, such as HTTP, XML, Atom, RSS. And it is simple. You can actually program live services against the cloud or on the client in exactly the same way. This is huge. All you need to do is change the endpoint. Rather than pointing to the cloud, you just need to point to the local cache, and your application will work exactly the same way. And we provide a very simple mechanism for synchronizing information between devices. And finally, live services and Live Framework exposes a comprehensive framework. So earlier I talked about the 4 key elements of digital life: the content, the devices, the applications, and the relationships. And we have come up with a unified resource model to expose all those 4 key elements using Live Framework. And we'll get into details of this in a minute. So let's dig a little bit more deeper into what really does the resource model look like. How do we actually bring all these 4 elements together? At the heart of the resource model is a data entry. So think about it. You go to a party and you take a photograph, and that photograph is a data entry. There is metadata associated with the photograph, and there is the actual photo itself, the binary content. Now let's say you take 10 pictures, and together it makes up a data feed. So a data feed is nothing but a collection of data entries. Now you can go to another party and take another set of pictures, and you have multiple data feeds now. And what would be a good way to actually combine this information? And we do that using something called a mesh object. So a mesh object is nothing but a container of data feeds, which is a container of data entries. But mesh object also provides access to some other interesting feeds. For example, the members feed. Now I've taken photographs and I want to share it with my wife, and I also want to share it with my friends. So a members feed gives me a list of all the members who have access to that mesh object. Think of it as the ACLs in Windows NT. I want to give full access to my wife so she can edit the photographs, upload more photographs, but I only want to give read-only access to my friends so they can view it. So a members provides you with all that information. Then we have mappings. I have the same set of photographs on my laptop, and I have it at home on my media center. So all the various devices on which this mesh object is mapped, I can get all that information from the mappings feed. Then we have the news. As soon as I add new photographs, as soon as I delete a photograph or make changes to it, we generate a news entry corresponding to the action, so that you get up-to-date information, the current state of where things are. Now I can have multiple of these mesh objects, one related to my photos, one related to my music, one related to the work documents, and collectively all these mesh objects can be accessed via my mesh. Now I've colored mesh differently than the rest of the things, and which is to imply that mesh is singular. a user only has a single mesh, but it can have multiple mesh objects, multiple data feeds, multiple data entries. What else does my mesh contain? It contains all the devices across which I am synchronizing some or all of my data. Contains all the applications that are accessing this information. So I can have a picture viewer application, which is basically taking data out of my mesh objects and projecting it. I have a list of all the aggregated news from all the various mesh objects that are present in my mesh. And how do you access the mesh? You access the mesh via the service endpoint. So I talked about the client-cloud symmetry. There are two endpoints. There is the endpoint in the cloud, which is userctp.windows.net. And then there is endpoint on the client, which is localhost 2048. So you can access all of this information from either of the endpoint. What else does my endpoint provide? It provides me with the list of profiles. And these are my Windows Live profiles stored with us, and you can programmatically access them. It provides me with a list of contacts, and these are my Hotmail contacts, my Windows Live Messenger contacts that you can access. So there are a bunch of things that you can access from the service endpoint. Now to complete this picture, there are a few other blocks that show up. So for example, on the upper right-hand corner, you will see the scripts block. Scripts provide you with a way to do batching operations. So you can have a single request sent to us and say, do action 1, action 2, and action 3. And you can even provide conditional statements. The subscriptions and notifications are interesting. You can say that I want to subscribe to this particular mesh object such that if anything changes, I will be notified for it and I can take appropriate actions. Similarly, peer to data entries are the sync entries, which provide you with this synchronization information. The media resources, which actually contain all the binaries for which we have the metadata in the data entries, and the media staging area. Now, before we actually start writing code, I want to highlight few important things. And if you follow these things, you will see a recurring pattern which will actually help you to write code very easily. So every entry is a resource, and every resource has certain properties. Different types of resources have most common properties and some properties that are specific to them. A collection is nothing but a collection of resources. Links are the relationships between resources. And this is interesting because links allow you to navigate from one resource to another. So I can be looking at a data entry, and I can see that there's a person, author, in there who actually created that data entry, and I will have a link to the profiles of that author. So I can go click on that and navigate to the profile information for that author. So links provides you with a very convenient way to navigate the resource model. And finally, we have the operations. There are a bunch of operations you can do. You can do the basic CRUD operations, which are the create, read, update, and delete. Since AtomPub is the interaction protocol that we have, you can do all the CRUD operations. And if you want to do synchronization, you can actually do feed sync operations, which exposes a merge semantic. And we talked about the scripts, where you can actually do batching operations, which are a combination of the CRUD operations that you want to perform. OK, so with this, let's go and write some code, and we'll go into a few things which probably you haven't seen at PDC before. All right, so the first thing that I want to do, actually I want to build this thing up from ground up. So let's look at what actually goes onto the wire. If you are a user who is sending a request, what actually goes down to the wire, and we're going to use Fiddler to actually see that. Can get to that in a minute. So I can create a request on Fiddler, and I usually need to pass certain headers, such as the content type, the accept type, and the authorization, because everything is secured. And since this is not a real application, I've cached some of that information. So I'm going to copy that over. And then the endpoint that we are going against is the cloud, which is HTTPS. So as you can see, this is the endpoint against which we are making the request, and we are doing a GET request. So we execute the request, we get the response back. I will make it easier to read in the XML. Go to the XML tab. And what we see in the response are the service document that we get, and we have 4 collections. The first collection is with href mesh, then we have script, then we have profiles, and then we have contacts. On the top, you also see we have XML base, which is the base URI. And what base URI helps you is to know where you actually are, and everything else is relative off of the base URI. So if we want to go and access the mesh, we have to append the relative URI to the base URI, and we should be able to do it. So let's do that. So as you can see, the base URI is https userctp windows.net /v0.1, and the relative URI for mesh was mesh. So I execute that, I get the response back. All right, so let's see what was the response. So the response was we got the mesh object back, and it contains various collections. The collection for the devices, the news, the notification queues, the applications, the mesh objects, some of the things that we saw on the resource model diagram. And we can again follow the href appended the base URI, and we should be able to navigate to that. So let's try accessing mesh objects. So this is the response that I get back, which is my collection of mesh objects. Now we have another tool called Resource Model Browser, which is nothing but a souped up fiddler, which actually does the same things but specific only for live services. And since that is much easier to look at, I'm going to switch to that in a minute. So like before, I connect to userctp windows.net. I provide my credentials. Color coded to make it a little bit more legible. And you can see that I have the same information. And if you look at the headers that I actually sent, those are the same headers that I had sent before. So we have the accept type, the content type, the authorization header, so on and so forth. I navigate to my mesh, and I can navigate to mesh objects. Now, what all operations can you perform with mesh objects? You can do introspection on a per resource basis. So rather than doing a GET request, if I change the request to that of an options request, it tells me what all can I do. So let's do that. So I edit this request, and I say that I want to execute the options request to show me what all options do I have. And here it is. So it brings information on a bunch of things. It brings information on what is the authentication model, what kind of authentication does this resource support, what sort of query parameters does this resource support, what are the relationships, what are the supported methods. So you see you have supported methods, which is options, you have supported methods, which is post. So you can do all these operations on this particular resource. So if you go down into query parameters, you see there is a $format query parameter. We can provide you information in Atom, RSS, XML, and JSON format. It has $top and $skip query parameters, which you can use for pagination. So you can say that I want to get only the first entry or the top 5 entries over there. It has order by query parameters, which you can say that I want to order the content list based upon a particular parameter. So if we do that, let's say, here's a list of my mesh objects. And as you can see, the first mesh object over here is fun stuff. And I want to order the list that I get by title. So if you see, the first mesh object that I have is Contoso. The next one is Documents. The next one is Fabricam, and so on. I can do other things where I can say that I only want to get a certain portion of the mesh objects. I don't want the entire feed. So imagine if you're writing an application where you have multiple of these and you want to do page results. You want to say, show me the first 5 on every page. You can do something like give me the top 3, and it will only return you 3 entries rather than the entire set. You can do the same, and it will only return you a single entry. And you can sort of move ahead by saying that you want to skip certain things. So you can say, give me the first one after skipping the first one. And now the entry that you get is Documents rather than Contoso. How many of you over here do anything with mobile applications? Quite a few. So as you probably already know, that one thing that is important in case of writing mobile applications is you want to minimize the round trips for getting the information. So in this model, I have to first get a mesh object, and then if I want to get down to the data feeds, then I have to make another request to do the data feed. Well, what we provide is a very simple way, which is called an expand option, where you can say that rather than giving me just the mesh object and a link to the data feeds, just give me the data in line. So I'll show you how you can do that. So let's say I'm only interested in a particular mesh object. So I say $filter equals, and I want to filter on the title, where title equals Documents. Okay, so as you can see, I have a single entry in here. And these are the various links that you have. You have the data feeds link, the members link, the mappings link, so on. And if you want to expand data feeds, you can do, I want to expand that particular link. And again, you see we have a single entry, but my data feeds link is actually expanded. My data feeds are expanded. So this avoids round trip to get the information, and you can get all the information to whatever level that you want in a single response. Okay, so let's move back. So we talked about the cloud client symmetry, and I want to demonstrate how easy it is to actually talk to the client as you can talk to the cloud. Give me a minute over here. All right. So how many of you are familiar with curl? Some. So curl is a console utility that you can actually give a URL and get the data back. So we're going to use curl against localhost to get that information back. So I can do curl my localhost, my local endpoint, and it gives me the data back. Now this data, as you can see, is not very legible, and we know that we can get this information back in multiple formats. So let's try and get this data in JSON format, and we can use a utility called tidyJSON to actually pretty this picture up. So you see, I have the base URI and I have the mesh link, and I can do the same set of operations that we just did. So my base URI with version number followed by mesh will give me access to my mesh. And if I do the same thing to say I want to navigate to my devices, and you see the devices link, the relative URI is mesh/devices, so I'm going to append that to the base URI. And this gives me the list of my devices. So this one, mesh demo 1, is actually the machine that which I'm using, and it tells me that is local equals true, which is the one that I'm using for demo. You can do same sort of thing for mesh objects, and you get a list of all your mesh objects. And I can do the same query parameters that I used against the cloud, and I can use against the client. So I can say, give me only the first one. Right? So as you can see that I only got the first mesh object back. So as part of my entries, there is only a single mesh object that is contained in it. One key thing to remember is whenever you are iterating over the feeds, all the entries within the feeds are contained within the entries element. So if you access mesh objects, they are all the various mesh objects are contained within entries, and same for the devices. Everything is contained within entries. Okay. So you've seen lots of demos where we show the C# code. We are using the .NET Kit that we have to actually make it easier. I want to get away from C# and say, let's say we want to use Python, and how easy it is to actually do the same thing in Python and get the data back. So I'm going to open up the Python console, and I've written a very small library, and I'll show you that in a minute, to perform these operations. So I import that, and we start from the scratch. So we say service document equals, and it needs the URI. And I have my service document, and if I print it, you see the same information. You see the base URI, you see the profiles link, you see the script link, and somewhere over here is the contacts link. So let's say we want to look at all the profiles. So I can say profiles equals and we need the base URI. And the thing with Python is you can actually, once you get the data back, and we are getting the data back in JSON format over here because it's sort of easier to work with, I can convert that data back into a dictionary. So at this point, I'm then dealing with property back. So if I want to access base URI, I just need to access base URI from the service document dictionary. and I need to append the profiles link, so I do and I get all my profiles. If I print them, there will be a whole bunch of information over here. We can do something interesting where we say we only want to print the titles of all the profiles that are here. So I can say for P in profiles, and it's actually the entries within the profiles. So easy to forget. Print the title for the profiles. So you have all the profiles, the various titles of all the profiles that you have in your mesh. Another thing that I want to emphasize is that whenever we are synchronizing data from the cloud to the client, and when you're writing to the cloud and you're writing to the client, it's not only the metadata that is getting synchronized, it is the actual content itself. So something interesting over here, I have a URI for a particular music file that I've uploaded onto my mesh, which is now synchronized to my local client. And if I open up console and I fire up and paste that resource, it actually renders the resource. It renders the enclosure that we have. So if it's a photo, it will open up the photo. If it's a music file, you can actually point directly to either the cloud endpoint or to the client endpoint and play the music. Okay. Now, we have seen quite a few examples of how you can play with Python, how you can do against curl. We have not seen examples how actually you can create objects. And I want to bring up Eclipse, which is an IDE, and start writing some PHP code which will help us do the same thing. Close this. So this is a very simple project. I just have a single file which just includes the LiveFX PHP file that we have written. And let's try to write some code and see how far we can go in this. So I create a variable LiveFX so that I can perform operations against it, equals new LiveFX. And I want to get the service document as usual. So I say $sd equals $LiveFX. And it has methods that I can use. So I am just going to connect because I want to connect to the cloud. And there's a helper function that I've written which actually prints this information in a tabular format so that it's easy to see. So we see $LiveFX, print array. We save this, and we run this. So you got the same information back. Now we can do more things with it. Let's say we want to access the mesh as usual. So I can say mesh equals get data, and we want to only specify the relative URI because it knows what the base URI is, and the relative URI will be mesh link. So the value of the mesh link will be the relative URI, and in this case we don't specify any query parameters. So we save this and let's print this. So here's my mesh. One of the important resources that we expose are the contacts, and contacts are easily accessible using the same format. So I can do $LiveFX, get data, And rather than specifying the mesh link, at this point, I want to specify the contacts link. All right. So here's the information about my contacts. So the number indicates the number of contacts that I have. So in this case, I have 4 contacts. And for every contact, go up. For every contact, I have the display name. I have the value for the email. I have their last name, first name, what their profession is, what their preferred username is, and a link to their profiles. So you can then navigate with this link and go check out this contact's Windows Live profiles. So we talked about navigation of resources. You can navigate from one resource to another. And it's not only that you can navigate from data resources to other resources. You can navigate from any resource that is there to another resource. And the interesting thing is that when you are building these things up for yourself, you can add as many related links that you want. So if you create a mesh object and you want to have some sort of relationships defined between various data, then you can create new related links so that you can then program against it. Okay. Now, if we want to look at a particular mesh object, we can do get object with title, which basically gets a particular object with a particular title. In this case, the relative URI will be that for the mesh object. So it will be from mesh, I get a link to mesh objects. And then I specify the title. Okay, so this is that particular mesh object. Another interesting property of mesh objects are the members link. So if I want to see who are all the members for this particular mesh object, all I need to do is to basically navigate to the relative link for this particular mesh object. So I can do $members equals just the data. Okay, so you can see the list of members that are actually part of this mesh object. So in this case, you have again the author profile link. Who is the author for this information? When was it last updated? When was it published? So on and so forth. Now, where all can you use this information? So you have the contacts. You have members which are part of a particular mesh object. So let's try to see if we can somehow use this information in a meaningful way. And to illustrate this, and since we are doing everything in PHP, I've taken an open source PHP project called WordPress. How many of you over here blog? And how many of you know WordPress as a blogging software? Quite a few. So what I have running on this machine is an instance of WordPress. And I wanted to quickly able to add users to the WordPress who are basically part of my contacts or who are basically part of the members of a particular mesh object. So I'm working on this project. I have a mesh object that I share with my coworkers. We share documents for that particular project. And now I want to release this stuff. I want to start blogging about it. It would be nice if we can auto-provision all the members who are out there directly into my blogging software. So I log in as an admin. And what I have is a custom plugin that we wrote, which actually pulls the information that we just saw, the contacts and the members of a mesh object, and lists them over here. So here's a list of all my live contacts. Here's a list of all the members who are in my particular mesh object. And if I want to provision them, all I need to do is to select the ones that I want and import users. And what this will do, it basically, I'm now working with WordPress software to actually take the information, which is their first name, last name, their email address, and provision these users. So one user provisioned, others were already there. So if we go back to the users pane, you see I have all these users now provisioned over here. Now that we are working with the blogging software, it would also be nice that I'm somehow able to generate news items whenever a new blog post is created. So me and my buddies, we are working on this blog, and I posted something, and it would be nice if I can actually show that to the others so they can look at it. So we'll see what kind of code you need to write in order to actually do that. So if we go back to our project, and we already have the Fabricam data object, let's see what does it take to actually create a new mesh object. So we say new mesh object equals, so I can create a live folder, which is a specific type of mesh object, and I provide it with the relative URI. Now I'm creating this mesh object as part of my mesh, so the relative URI will be same as this, which is the mesh objects link. I provide it with a title, so say PDC demo, and I provide it with a summary, so let's say this is a test. And now that I've created the new mesh object, the next thing that I need to do is to actually create a data feed inside that mesh object. So I can create a data feed equals $livefx, create live folder data feed, and I provide it with the relative URI for the data feed, which comes from the new mesh object that I created. And let's just print out this mesh object. Okay, so the mesh object is created. I can actually go to the live desktop and take a look at this. All right, so here's the live folder that we just created. Now, if we look under the hood, what code was getting executed, I can go in there, and it is calling create mesh object, which is this function where it sets the title, the type, and the summary. But the most important part is that it is calling this request post. And if you look at this code, it is a simple HTTP request where I set the accept type, the content type, the authorization header, and I add the post data, which is the content, which is what the title is, what is the summary for this mesh object, and I just send the request. So it's literally 6 lines of code that you're writing in PHP to actually execute a post request. And you take the response back and you return it. Similarly, we have the put request, and similarly, we have the delete and the get. So let's look at what you do for get. It's the same thing. You say, you create a new HTTP request, you set the method to be get, you set the headers, and then you execute the request. In this particular case, if you're specifying the query parameters, the function that we looked at where you say, give me a mesh object where title equals X, so it adds a new query parameter to it, and then it finally ends up sending the request. So the key over here is that the basics are just HTTP. So if you can talk HTTP in whatever language that you want, you can actually do this stuff. Okay, so going back to our WordPress software, if I go and write a new post, say this is a test post. I hope this works. And I publish it. What I'm doing is the intent is to generate a news event that you can see. So it says the post is published. So here's the test post. And if I go back to my live desktop and I look at my Fabricam folder, and here it is. Here's the news item. So in order to generate events, news on action items that you're taking to stay connected, to provide up-to-date state of your software, you can actually do that. And the other thing, when I was working on this, I thought would be nice if I can actually store the blog post locally, if I can actually do a backup of it. So tomorrow if I say I don't like WordPress, I want to move it over, if I can keep a backup of my blog post, that would be really great. So we looked at So I already have my mesh object, which is a Fabricam, where I'm storing this. And I want to look at a particular data feed. So remember we talked about the concept of having multiple data feeds into a container. So I can have a data feed on live folder where I can store documents. I can have a parallel data feed in where I can store my blog entries. So let's try to see what that data feed look like. So we say $df equals get object with title, and I want to look at the data feed. So will be $mo data feeds link, and the title will be blog, since that is where I'm storing it. And let's see what our Scratchpad tells us, what is contained in there in a nicer format. So this is my data feed. And it contains a bunch of entries. We can look at them by going to the data entries link. So we can say $data entries equals $livefx, get data. And I'll just print it out. Okay. So the first entry over here as you see, this is the post that we just posted. And what this really is showing you is under user data. So you can actually extend mesh objects and have user data, which is custom schema that you understand, that your application knows how to deal with it, and store data within mesh objects. So in this case, the schema that I'm using is the data that I get back from WordPress post, which contains the post author ID, the title of the post, the content of the post, so on and so forth. And I have similar posts over here, and I have all the data that was there in my blog entry backed up onto my mesh. Another interesting thought is that while my data is backed up onto my mesh, and if I have the local client running on my machine, and it is synchronizing this information, this data is now accessible on my local machine as well. Which is to say that if I want to read my blog entries locally all I need to do is to basically point to this user data, the specific user data within the data feed, and I will be able to read my blog entries offline. So we can refresh this. All right, so this is the refreshed local data feed, which is actually talking to the local client and is able to synchronize the data. So we just posted a new blog entry. The data got backed up in the cloud, and then the same data got synchronized. And we don't know what that data is. For us, it is opaque. It depends upon you how you want to provide a schema for it, and you understand it. The data got synchronized onto all my devices on my mesh, and then I can write a local application which accesses that data and provides you with this information. And the code over here, again, is pretty simple. So I'm connecting to Live Mesh. I'm getting the service document, and I'm using connect local, which is just talking to localhost 2048. All right. So we looked at how you can meshify WordPress by a few simple tricks. All I did, I wrote 2 plugins to do that. One to import my contacts and members information, and the second plugin was triggered whenever I create a new post, and it is generating a news event, and it is storing the blog post into my mesh. Okay, so what are the takeaway points? I hope you would all agree that talking to live services is easy. It is basically simple HTTP requests that you need to make and get the data. And we speak HTTP, and all these other things speak HTTP. So you can write your program in any language that you want on any platform that you want. We saw that talking to the client is same as talking to the cloud. There's no difference whatsoever. And this is the key point to remember. The endpoint that you're hitting on the cloud is userctp windows.net. I will highly encourage everybody to do a lab, get a token, provision yourself with Windows Azure, the developer portal, and then start using this. And whenever you are in doubt as to what operations I can do and I cannot do, just send an options request, and we should be able to provide you with the information that you can use. And finally, once the documentation is up on dev.live.com, you should look at the resource model documentation, which will provide you more information on the various properties for the resources and how you can actually use them. All right, questions? Yes?
When will the mesh available in Europe? So from outside the US, I can't even create myself a mesh.
So the question is, when will mesh be available outside US? And I believe the answer is Thursday.
Very good.
So the PHP library that you were using there, that you wrote up, is that available publicly yet, or is that just something you build on your own?
The PHP library that I had is something that I wrote, but we will be basically opening it up. You can use it. We'll put it up on someplace public.
It's not there yet, then?
It is not there yet. Okay, before everybody leaves, I have some things to give away. How many of you are wearing the Azure band? All right, so the gentleman over there gets a Zune.
Where do you get the bands from?
From the lounge. All right, for others, I have the token that you can provision yourself and start using it.
I just want a band.
All right, here's the band.
Can I have his next card? Thank you.
Band anybody? All right. I can get you more later. Questions? Yes?
I have a question. So you talk about talking to the client and talking to the cloud. Is there any way that you can do something where rather than just talking to
So you want to be able to access data on another machine. Not right now. But if your data is on the cloud, and if it's on the machine, then you should be able to access the same data on the cloud. If you're going to be talking to another machine, I'm imagining you will have network connectivity where you can go and do that. So you should be able to access the same data on the cloud. Questions? Yes?
I have a question. The members resource that we were looking at, is that the resource that shows up when you add
Yes, so the question is, when does the resource under the members resources show up? And the answer is, whenever you add or invite a particular member in a particular role to a particular mesh object, that is when they show up. And it will show up in two states. Either it is pending or that they are already accepted the invitation and part of the mesh object.
part of that resources data,
Right, so the question is part of their information is the roles? Yes, so you have the role information in there which says that what this person can actually do. I think they have a question. No, the PHP program was actually executing on Apache using MySQL on Windows. You can do it on Linux as well. I mean, it is running using Apache and MySQL, which are both available on Linux, so you can run it over there. Question? Good question. What goes into the authentication header? There are two types of tokens that can go. One is the Windows Live ID token, and if you're building web applications, you'll be using a delegated authentication token. And so either one of those tokens, we have two headers, authorization and delegated app authentication header, and it goes in there. Right. So the question is, what if the user has an OpenID and does not have a Windows Live ID? Can we provision them? And the answer is that Windows Live ID now is a provider of OpenID. So we are currently not doing the other way around. So we are providing OpenIDs at this point, support for OpenID. But once they have the Windows Live ID, they don't have to do anything manual. You can programmatically provision them. And all they would need to do is to accept the invitation, and then they are set.
I can take that one. Is this? Sorry, I'm Angus. So currently, you can programmatically create Windows Live IDs in the Microsoft Identity Provider. There's a thing called Admin Center, so there's a SOAP API for you to do that. Or what we announced on Monday was the Microsoft Federation Gateway Service, where your identity provider can use WS Trust and WS Fed to federate with Microsoft. Presently, the client bits for the Live framework don't consume federated identities, but that should be happening sometime in the near future. Or he's nodding. So, sorry, next year. Cool.
More questions?
I got a question. Can we add devices and add verbs to them?
Sorry?
Can we add a device and also a verb, like a command?
Command that you want to execute on the device?
Right.
Interesting. I'm not sure what the use case over here is. If you can expand a little bit on that.
Well, I want to add a device, and I want to be able to connect to it without using Microsoft's remoting technology.
So currently, Live PC provides you the remote desktop that is built in, so you can use it to connect to that remote device.
Right, I understand that, but can I use my own remoting solution?
Oh, can you use your own remoting solution?
Right.
No. Ori, do you want to clarify?
There's a couple of interesting elements to that question. I think one, you can actually store the commands you want to execute on devices as metadata on data feeds that are mapped and synchronized to devices, then pick them up with your own whatever execution engine you have to execute the command and do it that way. It's actually quite a nice scenario. in terms of remote desktop, we don't do anything special for you to be able to plug in for remoting into these. But if you have your own protocol, you can certainly mine the user's device collection to figure out what devices they have and then overlay your own solution. But we do nothing to help you with that.
So it takes a while also out of verbs, like a command, at least for
So verbs, we don't support adding explicit verbs right now on your own, except that you can add them into metadata and then again pick them up on your own and execute them when you want. But UX extensibility is not there yet for you to visually add commands. But obviously, it's an interesting scenario we're thinking about. That's good.
Thanks, Ari. Yes.
Not directly related to what you were asking, but I'm curious there in the existing live mesh, not the or the tech TV that's out prior. There's the ability for devices to connect, sort of remote desktop.
Yes.
Client like that. What's going on with that? Is that going to stay there? Is that
So yeah, that is definitely going to stay there, but we will add that functionality to the CTP program as well in coming releases.
so what scenario? I mean, it's interesting that you can connect your device when you're syncing your data.
The long-term goal would be to actually have a single mesh, so you can actually do the same operations against the consumer release right now. And remote desktop is just a feature that is provided by the consumer release right now. So going ahead, we want to merge the two together rather than having two different environments. Okay, well, I have posters and luggage tags if anybody's interested. Thank you. Thank you all.